A listener note: this story contains adult content and language, including a description of an alleged sexual assault.
The guy is totally just a manipulator.
I've noticed that sometimes he gets his facts messed up. He was belligerent. He was really, really drunk.
He's right there where he can do the same thing again.
He was the strong suspect.
Everybody's talking about the seventh son in the whole wide world. There is only one. I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm the one. The one they call seventh son.
This is The Pope's Long Con from the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting and Louisville Public Media. I'm Jake Ryan. In the past 3 chapters of this 5-part series, we've told you a lot about Danny Ray Johnson, where he's from, who he is, and what he says he's done. You haven't heard from Johnson himself. We asked him for an interview. We called him. We emailed him. We found him in person, but he wouldn't talk to us. Now, you'll hear from a young woman who says an encounter with Johnson one night turned her life upside down. This part of the story starts at police headquarters. Here's R.G. Dunlop.
Shortly after we began our investigation of Danny Ray Johnson, we put in a request with Louisville Police asking for all records involving him, just to see what came up. A lot of it was pretty routine, a couple of traffic cases. But then there was this report, vague but shocking. Sexual abuse in the church. The victim, a 17-year-old girl. The suspect, Danny Ray Johnson. Status, case closed. The young woman's name and virtually all other details had been redacted from the document we got from police. But I made some calls, and eventually I found her, Miranda Richmond.
Hello?
Hi, is this Miranda Richmond?
This is she.
Hi, Ms. Richmond. My name is Ralph Dunlop. I work for
I couldn't believe she wanted to talk. Plenty of people who report sexual abuse aren't eager to talk about it, even confidentially, much less to be publicly identified. But Richmond was willing to share her story, and on the record. We agreed to meet.
Yeah, I would love to, actually. I will be there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I guess I'll see you then.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Ralph.
Okay.
Miranda Richmond is now 21 years old. More than a decade ago, she started attending the Heart of Fire Church with her father. Danny Ray Johnson was the preacher.
They were practically family to me. You know, I considered him a second dad. I really did.
Cliff Richmond liked Heart of Fire's unconventional approach. Miranda, though, wasn't too crazy about Sunday worship.
The church services were always late. He was always late. You know, it was supposed to start at 12. It wouldn't start till 12:30. It wouldn't end until 3. And they would have music and stuff in between, you know, some of his speeches and everything. And then afterwards we'd eat. So church was an all-day thing there. It was kind of exhausting.
As the years went on, she became friends with Johnson's younger daughter, Sarah.
2 peas in a pod. We were always together, running around, you know, doing our own thing.
The girls often had sleepovers at the church or at the Johnsons' home in Bullitt County. She says sometimes the sleepovers included drinking.
Bud Light beer, but I never liked it, but I drank it anyways because I thought I was cool. Or sometimes they would make mixed drinks for us, and I never knew exactly what it was at the time. Just I would get alcohol and think that it was okay, and I would drink it.
Who made those drinks?
Dan had a few times, but there was other teenagers that had made it before for us.
Richmond's relationship with the church and the Johnson family came to an abrupt end on New Year's Eve in 2012.
I had planned to stay the night there.
Things were getting a little wild.
They allowed underage drinking there, but I did not drink much because I didn't feel well that night, and I remember that.
Richmond remembers that Johnson was in rare form.
He had been drinking a lot at the church that night. He's a drinker. You know, New Year's came and went, and then people started, you know, slowly started going home and everything. Well, eventually it was just me and Sarah just kind of hanging out at the church. Dan had left. I didn't know where they were going. Apparently they were going to a bar. I was not sure where.
A few hours later, Johnson came back.
He was belligerent. He was stumbling, falling on the walls. he came in, he's messing with the doors and he's messing with the lights. I think he was, in his head, he was trying to close down the building, make sure it was all locked. That's what it looked like anyways. And we were like, he needs to go to bed. So I was like, well, I'm gonna bring him downstairs, down the steps. So I'm like, hey, and like I'm literally babying him because I could tell how drunk he was. And I was like, hey, let's go downstairs, you need to go to bed. And so we start going down the steps, and at the time, I didn't realize what he was doing, but he was fumbling, and his hand kind of slipped, like, up my shirt a little bit, but he was also, like, had his arm around me for balance. So I was like, oh, he's just getting his balance, he's not trying anything. I didn't think at the moment anyways. And he's drunk, whatever. And so I get him all the way down the steps, and I opened up their apartment door, and I said, all right, you need to go to bed now. You're drunk, go to sleep. And so then I shut the door, and I went back upstairs. Eventually he came back upstairs, and then he was like, you all need to go to bed. And so we're like, okay, that's fine. I mean, we're just watching a movie, might as well go to bed. So we went down to the apartment downstairs, and they have a little living room area with a sectional couch, an L-shaped couch, and that's where we went to sleep.
Dan and Rebecca Johnson were in a room just down the hall.
So we were going to sleep, and I remember Dan coming into the apartment and walking into the kitchen, and I'm falling asleep, and I remember kind of seeing him fumbling around and getting in the fridge, and I'm assuming he was drinking more or getting food or something, I'm not sure, and eventually dazed off, and that's when I remember falling asleep too. Well, I woke up briefly to feeling him like kiss me on the top of my head, which was no big deal. He had always done that to us. He would come in the room, check on us, and tell us goodnight and leave, whether we were at the house or the church. He would do that, so I didn't think anything of it. And I just kind of briefly woke up when he did that, and I was still like dazing off and going back to sleep. And then I could feel his hand like on my arm and just kind of rubbing my arm for a minute. And, still I'm just like, oh, whatever, he's just checking on us. Well, eventually his arm started to go into my shirt. And so then at that point I'm kind of thinking in my head, like, okay, this isn't okay. I experienced him do this earlier on the steps. Maybe it's not an accident. And so I'm starting to wake up, and I'm kind of realizing what's going on. And then next thing you know, his other hand goes down my pants.
Miranda Richmond is 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed about 110 pounds at the time. Johnson is 6'2" and weighs around 200.
He leans down and he's trying to kiss me on my mouth, and he's like trying to stick his tongue down in my throat, and I could smell and taste the alcohol to this day. I can't get that out of my head. But during all that, I'm thinking, like, how can I make this stop? Like, I'm scared, and I just never expected this. It kind of flipped my whole world upside down as it's happening. And you would think that when a female's in that situation, that she would try to be like, get off me, stop, and she would freak out. But I was scared, and I was also like, I don't know what this strong drunk man is gonna do, and his daughter's laying down. Like, I was just really confused. And so I'm like, hey, no, that's not okay. And he's like, no, it's okay. He starts talking to me. He's like, no, it's okay. You'll like it. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. I was like, you need to go to bed, like I said earlier. And he was like, no, don't worry. It'll feel good. You'll like it. And I'm like, no, it's not. And I'm trying to push him off me, but, like, I'm on a couch, and he's on his knees kneeling over top of me, like, pushing down. And I was like, no, it's not okay. I'm not going to like it. You need to go to bed. And so that's all I could think of, to keep saying, you need to go to bed. You need to go to bed. Maybe he'd get in his head. Well, it felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. And finally he stopped, and he was like, okay. And he got up, and he went to bed, and he went into his room, and he shut the door.
She stayed awake all night and left early the next morning, just after sunrise. She said she immediately called her boyfriend at the time.
And I was in the car, and I just started breaking down. I was freaking out. I felt weird about it, and I felt weird to be able to go see my boyfriend and not tell him. And so I had pulled over on the road because I was crying so hysterically I couldn't see. And I had texted him what happened because I knew I wasn't going to be able to talk and tell him because I was hysterically crying. And so I texted him everything. I told him word for word what happened. And I've never been back to that church since.
Richmond didn't tell her parents for a few months. In the meantime, her life started falling apart. Before the encounter with Johnson, she was a straight-A student and drum major in the marching band at Louisville Male High School. Afterward, she became withdrawn and her grades dropped.
I started not attending school. I wasn't showing up. My teachers were concerned. I went from a straight-A student to failing several classes and just not attending. I started using drugs to cope with it. Eventually, my mother caught on to what was going on, and she was not okay with me not showing up to school. She was not okay with me using drugs, and she just sat me down one day and said, "Miranda, what is going on with you?" It was not like me to do that. And so I just broke down. I just started crying my eyes out, and I told her what happened.
And when she first told me, I was like, oh, so that's why she was so, standoffish and withdrawn.
Kathy Brooks is Miranda's mom. She's divorced from Cliff Richmond, and she never went to Heart of Fire.
If you touched her in a loving way or, like rubbed on her shoulder or anything, she would just drew back away from you. After Christmas break, Miranda was a totally different person.
After Miranda told her about the incident with Johnson, Brooks said they sat together and cried.
And then I immediately called her dad, Cliff.
Like any father would, I was raged. I was just wanting to stomp him.
Cliff was at the church that New Year's night, and he vividly remembers Johnson.
Dan was pretty wild. He had his face in some fairly young girl. I don't know who she was, but she was laying on top of this bar, and he had his face in her crotch and then her boobs. And the next thing you know, I'm just kind of going, whoa, I just don't see ministers doing that for, in front of everybody.
But it never occurred to him that Johnson might do anything like that to Miranda. Johnson was his longtime friend and their pastor. Cliff felt comfortable letting Miranda spend the night with her friend Sarah. Cliff said he and Johnson were like brothers. They'd been tight for years, but things are very different now.
I can't stand him. He's just full of shit. The guy is totally just a manipulator.
A week after the alleged assault, Miranda Richmond didn't show up at church. The next night, Johnson reached out to her on Facebook.
It was January 7th, so 1 week after New Year's, 2013, at 11:28 p.m. He said, "Sarah said I was mean to Bo," which is one of his sons, "Bo, you and her, by telling you all to go to bed. I'm so sorry, I don't remember. I was told that we all got drugged at TK's. Anyway, so sorry if I sounded mean. You know that you are one of my favorites. Love you, sorry." And when I read that, I didn't really know how to react.
When Richmond came in to talk to us, she brought a printout of the Facebook message, and it's just as she described. She also showed us her response, asking Johnson to never contact her again. After Richmond finally told her parents, their response was swift. "We need to report the preacher to the police."
So we went through with it, and she said, the first steps are going to be to try to get him to admit it. She said, "There's many things we can do. We can wire you, and you can go see him in person and try to speak with him." I said, "No, I do not want to see him. I can't do that. I'm not strong enough."
Instead, she tried to call Johnson from a recorded line with police listening in. He didn't answer. She tried Facebook.
May 22nd, 2013, I said, "Hey, I really need to talk to you about some things. If you could call me, it would be best. But if it has to be over Facebook, I guess I'll deal with that." And so we were wanting him to call me, but he never responded to that.
Cliff Richmond stopped going to Heart of Fire after Miranda shared her story with him. But despite his feelings about Johnson, Cliff wanted to have one more conversation with him. This one from police headquarters.
Hey, Cliff.
What's up, Dan?
Man, I'm okay. How you doing?
The quality of this recording isn't great, but bear with us.
Well, see, what I got from her was she said that you came back and you were pretty messed up, and that you came up and started feeling on her and stuff while she was on the couch with your daughter, on that double couch that she said was kind of L-shaped or something. And she just said she couldn't believe that you did.
Cliff, I don't know one thing about that. There's something that happened to us that night without question, but Cliff, I don't know more than that.
Let's recap that conversation, because it was hard to understand. Cliff Richmond asked Johnson, point blank, did he sexually assault Miranda, Cliff's teenage daughter? Johnson denied it, then said he'd been drugged. suggesting he didn't remember what happened. This would be the last time Cliff and Johnson spoke. Police didn't do much after Cliff Richmond's call. Investigators closed the case without filing any charges. Danny Ray Johnson walked free. Around the same time she went to police, Miranda Richmond also went to counseling to talk about the incident. She shared her therapist's notes with us. The notes show Richmond wanted to press the case, regardless of how it might end up. She had told her counselor, quote, "I'm the kind of person who doesn't give up, no matter what," end quote. So maybe it's not surprising that she didn't let her story end there. In the next chapter, we'll tell you how police botched their investigation and about how Miranda Richmond continues to look for justice.
The Pope's Long Con was reported and written by R.G. Dunlap and Jake Ryan. Our producer is Laura Ellis. Our editors are Brendan McCarthy, Erica Peterson, and Stephen George. Music by Kevin Ratterman. You can read this story with lots of extras at kycir.org.